All right, everyone, welcome to today's session, Getting Started with AgentScript for Developers. As always, don't make any purchasing decisions on any forward-looking statements I might make, only on what's generally available. First of all, thanks for attending. I'm going to reward you with something that hopefully anyone in the crowd goes away with learning something they didn't know about AgentScript. By way of brief introduction, my name's Dave Norris. I'm a developer advocate at Salesforce, been with the company 15 years, and became a certified technical architect in 2013. I want to take a step back before we get into the weeds of AgentScript and just talk a little bit about why AgentScript exists, because Agentforce has been live for about a year. So why do we need AgentScript? Well, it's really to capture two things. Firstly, we've realized that sometimes an agent can fail to answer a question. So here's an example, am I on track for retirement? And we get that really annoying message back sometimes from agents saying they can't help. And that is despite the fact that I, as an admin or developer, may have configured Agentforce with a topic and an action that it should be using. So it's quite frustrating. Secondly, sometimes an agent follows the wrong process. So again, in a similar vein, we've got an example here. I'd like to withdraw some money from my savings account, and the agent in this instance is actually going to carry out that action, but it hasn't followed the best practices of identifying the user, checking the business policy, and checking for penalties before it does it. So that's a bit more of a problem. Now, if you've been using Agentforce, the way you try and control agent behavior today is with instructions. The problem is sometimes large language models think when we just want them to follow a specific action. And anyone that's been using ChatGPT or Gemini may have created prompts and felt very similar. Sometimes you get consistent outputs, but then there's some variance depending on the intent. And typically the way you try and control this, or have done up to now, is using keywords like always do this, never do that, and before doing this, try and do that. And that's the way you've tried to control the direction that an agent takes. But that has led to the problems we've seen on the previous slide. So that's really the gap AgentScript is filling. It's a new expression language for building and powering every agent. You can build it in natural language or using programmatic precision, and it's going to blend those deterministic rules that you get from a programming language with the probabilistic ways large language models work. And you can use expressions to define logic. So it comes in three flavors. You've got conversational, so you can get AI to provide you assistance in creating agent scripts. You can use natural language. It sort of looks a bit like a Google Doc where you can create agent scripts, or you can open up a programmatic version of the same canvas. Now, I've spent a little bit of time going through what I determine to be important for developers when it comes to agent scripts, and I've got four main pillars here. Firstly, it's property-based. So scripts are made up of a collection of properties in key value pairs. So you can see here a simple example. The key is description, and it's paired with the value getInfo. AgentScript also has top-level properties, and we call them blocks. So in the example that we've shown on the screen, you can see config is a block. It's a top-level property, and underneath you can see the key value pairs, because for config, I need to specify developer name and agent label. Indentation and formatting is really important. AgentScript has white space sensitivity, very similar to YAML config files, or Python if you're a Python programmer. So indentation indicates structure and the relationship between those properties, those key value pairs. If you want to specify logic in your instructions, you can use the arrow symbol followed by the instructions. So we've got a very simple example on the screen. If you've got a variable called ready to book, then you can run an action called getAccountInfo. And I can even pass in an input variable to that process. Expressions. This is a similar flow control syntax to what most developers are used to. You can use if and else. You can use maths expressions like plus and minus, and comparison expressions like equals to, not equals to, greater than, less than. You can check for empty values with is none and is not none. So the example here is I've got a variable called count. If it's greater than or equal to 10, run a specific action. Else, do something else. And then finally, my fourth pillar is resources. You can access action sub-agents, so topics, if you've been using Agentforce up till now, at TDX, we're announcing that topics become sub-agents. So there's a syntactical change. So you get actions, sub-agents, and variables using the @ symbol. So here I could just say @actions and then specify an action name. And the same applies to sub-agents, variables, and outputs. To run an action, use the run command. Use the command, and you can even provide inputs, and you can use set to store outputs. So here I'm running an action called show grade example. I'm passing an input, which is question ID with a specific variable. And then based on this might be running a flow. Based on the output from a flow, which is the answer, I'm setting another variable. And these variables are the agent's memory, because it's going to remember this across interactions I'm having with the agent. All right, so the best way for me to show you this is for me to show you a demo. This is Agentforce Builder. It's the wrapper for AgentScript. On the left-hand side, we have the top-level properties we talked about. These are the blocks. And Agentforce Builder is really just providing a nice user interface for me at the moment. So we've got the Explorer on the left with these blocks. If I click on a block, it opens in a new tab. In the middle, this is my canvas, and I can set some properties of that block. On the right-hand side, I've got the conversational AI assistant that can help me change my agent script. I'm just going to close this for now, just to help expand that window a little bit. So in the middle here, this is the main canvas. I'm opening up a sub-agent here called survey. And I've asked it just to collect name, age, and interests and save it into variables. If you are new to AgentScript, my advice to anyone starting off is start small with some really basic use cases and then start expanding in the complexity. So this is a really simple example of how you can use variables to manage context. So I've asked it to capture some variables. I can start typing in this canvas straight away. So it's like an editor, just like a live document. But this is actually my agent script, because I can start combining natural language. So I've given the large language model some tasks. That's what we're all used to doing if we're using agents like ChatGPT. But the difference with AgentScript is I can now start feeding in deterministic logic. So you can see here I've got an if statement. If username's populated, then I want you to output someone's name. If it's not populated, and run set username, which is an action available for reasoning at the bottom. Now, I'm not doing anything here. The actions are typically where you would call a flow or an Apex class. I'm just setting a variable called username. And I can even do things like deterministically give it a variable that I want it to use, or in this case, I'm letting the agent populate that itself. I'm using the probabilistic nature of large language models to decide the best value to use for that. So I've got some flexibility, and this, in a nutshell, is what we call hybrid reasoning. I've got probabilistic instructions for a large language model interlaced with programmatic controls. Now, at the start we said you've got the nice user interface here like a Google Doc, but if I switch the canvas, I've got the option to use script. This is going to show me exactly the same agent now, but I'm seeing the underlying agent script in an IDE developers are familiar with. Now, if I highlight config, for instance, you'll see that on the left-hand side, it's really just highlighting the part in the Explorer that corresponds to that particular block. If I highlight variables, it switches to show me the variables. So it's really just two ways of seeing exactly the same thing. One that's familiar to perhaps administrators who want to see a canvas that looks like this, but really under the hood, what you're actually changing is something that looks more like this. How we preview this. So if we have a look at what it does, it's going to ask me for my name. I've then asked it to collect some instructions, name, age, interests, and then at the end summarize that information. The way I test this is there's a preview tab here that I can click on. And it opens up with, welcome, I'd like to know a little bit about you. Can you give me your name? I'll say I'm Dave. Next thing we told AgentScript to do is tell me your age. I'm 22. A few people laughing in the audience. I just look really old for my age. And some of my hobbies, I'll say football. So we just asked it to capture 3 variables and then just replay what I've told you like a survey would. Now, what I like about the interaction summary that appears on the right-hand side is it gives me a really nice summarized output of what it's doing at every stage of this conversation. So it's saying I said football, and it's called the set interest action. That was a deterministic prompt based on an if statement, and then set it to football. And it also updated the state to mark the survey was complete. That was part of the deterministic instructions. But previously, it's been quite hard to debug what's going on behind the scenes. What I can click on is any one of these interactions. Let's click the last one. And it now opens a session trace. If I maximize this, I can see the entire conversation history. And what I really like about this is I can now start looking at what was sent to the large language model. Every time it had to reason something, what was sent. So if I click on this section here and expand the right-hand side, what you'll see is the actual generated prompt in JSON that was sent to the large language model, including everything that Salesforce injects into that prompt for you around guardrails. I can also see what the response was. In this case, it was calling an action set interest with some arguments, taking my intent and saving it into a variable. Underneath, I can see a variable section. If I click on it, you can see that it's updated 2 variables, interests and survey completed. If I set the variables tab, I've now, as a developer, got the insights to know the value before was false. After this, it was set to true. Equally, for interest, it was blank, and now it's been set to football. And these variables are what I can now use throughout my interactions with this agent. All right, the other thing I collapsed earlier was this conversational agent on the right-hand side. So this can be quite intimidating for a lot of people. I'll switch back to the canvas. I've just asked AI to help me modify this survey to ask for someone's favorite food. I've said at the end of the survey, and only set survey complete when all info is completed. So I can go and edit the script or the canvas manually, or I can get artificial intelligence to help me make those edits. So what it will do is it will search through my existing canvas in this instance and suggest changes to be made. And it will do that by highlighting things it's adding and things it wants to take away, just like a code assistant does. And it will change it not only in the canvas, but it will also change it in AgentScript as well. All right, whilst that finishes up, I'll come back to it. Most developers are not going to use this user interface to make changes to agents. It's not something familiar to them. It's not an IDE they're used to using. Instead, what they're most likely to be using is something like Visual Studio Code. And you'll notice here that just like any other metadata in Salesforce, I've now got the opportunity to create an agent. It's now a new prompt for me. Now, I've got an agent here that I created called TDX Survey, but I didn't do this from scratch because learning these top-level properties, what I need to set under each one, is quite difficult, certainly if you're new to this. So first thing I'd recommend you do is use Agentforce Vibes or another code assistant to help you do this, because as announced in the keynote earlier, there are now over 30 skills that come with Agentforce Vibes for doing everything from Apex, Lightning Web Component development, and you can now see one here for developing Agentforce. So if I give Agentforce Vibes a prompt, it can create this for me, and that's exactly what I did earlier. I created this survey, and it went through and created some tasks, executed it, and created the agent on the right-hand side. The second thing we can do is we can install some extensions. So there's 2 extensions that you may or may not be aware of. The first one is AgentScript, and the second one is the Agentforce DX. Now, both of these work hand in hand. After you install them, what you'll see is this little robot icon appear on the left-hand side. When I open it up, I'm going to get a nice IDE, because really what I want as a developer is, if I'm creating an agent, if we open it back up, I really want to be able to test this out just like I did in Salesforce, but without having to navigate back into the IDE in Salesforce. So this extension allows me to not only create, but I can also select agents to test. So the TDX survey agent, I can start a simulation. This is very similar to using the preview in Agentforce Builder. I'll just say hello. Instigates the first thing. Now note that here I'm doing something very similar to we did the first time. I'm catching username, session rating, and then setting survey to be completed. So it's asking for name and storing it in a variable. So set username and then set session rating. So I'll say I'm Dave. On a scale of 1 to 5, how do you rate your experience with the TDX session today? I'll give myself a 4 out of 5. The content's pretty good, that the speaker's a bit dodgy, and then I get the survey response back at the end, just like I did before. The trace window of how we can start seeing or debugging this for a developer is available right here next to Agent Preview. So I can start seeing the variables update and the reasoning just like I did before. So that's pretty cool, but it gets better because there are changes to the Salesforce CLI to support this agent development lifecycle. So I've now, is anyone using the Salesforce CLI here? People are familiar with it? Pretty familiar. So I've now got the ability to do Salesforce agent. And now if I run all of the commands available to me, you can see I've got activate, create, deactivate, generate, preview, publish. I can test my agent, so I can give it an utterance, and it will show me the response that my agent script will give you, and also validate. Pretty powerful. This is what the output from the AI looked like. Just coming back, it's given me what it suggested I make the change to add in my favorite food. Anything in red is something it wants to get rid of. Anything in green is something it wants to add, and I can accept or decline holistically or individually. So this is showing me the script, but if I switch to the canvas view, something went wrong. Had it worked, then it would have shown me those red and green lines, but in the canvas view as well. All right. So how do we take this to the next level? Because I've shown you some really basic stuff here around variable management. Well, here are the patterns that you should all get used to using. Conditional statements, if-else logic, and multiple conditions. We've pretty much shown you this in this simple use case. If-else statements. I can also use and or, which is the bottom is showing you. Resource references, so you can do variable and action references in instructions to the large language model and in outputs. So I'm given an instruction, refer to the user by their name, but I'm actually passing in a variable so the large language model knows what I mean. And then conditional variable references, I can then start to use if statements to then set different prompts to the large language model, including variables in that input. Filtering, I can filter sub-agents. So again, if you're in Agentforce, think filter topics. So the first question I get asked typically is, if I have a bunch of topics, like I'm escalating something here, I really only want to escalate when a certain condition hits. So how do I make sure the large language model doesn't consider escalating in the wrong circumstances? So here I can use the available when conditions. So at the bottom here, available when your verified equals true. So only consider escalating if a variable is set to true. And you can also do that for actions as well. So here I want to run a create return actions, but only when you're eligible for that return. So again, you'll see how it's hybrid reasoning, because I'm not letting the large language model decide when to run these sub-agents anymore. I'm specifically telling them when they're available to it. I can chain actions together. Super important. So the left-hand side, I'm chaining actions sequentially. I'm running an action called lookup current order. I'm passing in an input, again, deterministically, and I'm setting a variable for the output. And then I can immediately chain another action using the output of the first action as the input to the next action. And then I can conditionally chain actions together. So again, I can use if-else statements. I can run an action and then optionally run the next action if a variable is set to true. You can require a sub-agent before a user moves to any other sub-agents. This is super important. So if I decide that if a variable called verified is false, I immediately want to terminate this agent script and transition to another sub-agent called identity. So it basically means I haven't identified this user, stop here, transition to another sub-agent, and execute the actions that a sub-agent has access to. And then finally, fetching data in variables, you can check the value to determine next steps. So run an action, get the output, and then based on the output, then carry out further tasks. So these were my 6 highlights. It obviously extends beyond this to more architectural patterns, so I suggest you check the documentation if you're interested. If you want to know more, our team is creating this agent script decoded video series. We're going through the basics one at a time. So check out this QR code in nice, friendly YouTube videos, and they're super short. We try and keep them less than 8 minutes. So on that note, I just want to say thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Dreamforce.